Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to this month's topic, 5 steps for creative black and whites with darker skin in Lightroom Classic. Big thing when it comes to editing for darker skin tone complexions, of course we want to make sure we're maintaining the natural complexion of our client, but also, with black and white editing, we want to make sure we're accentuating different parts of the skin as well as the hair texture, tonality, and things like that. And we definitely don't want the background to start to compete with our subject, right? We always want to kind of like dodge the client, burn down the background, and different techniques like that. In a digital world, when you're shooting, a lot of times we forget about black and white, right? It's always an afterthought. We can always convert our files later, which is true, right? Don't worry, you can always convert it if the color doesn't turn out well. But really working with contrast and background and tonality, those are all things you want to take into consideration when shooting as well. But we'll get into that a bit later. So the 5 steps for creative black and whites are going to be this technique that I use is dropping the vibrance and saturation to give your image a little different of a look overall here. So we'll go into a little bit more into depth on this technique here. So we kind of took our image from here and ended there, right? So step number 1, dropping the vibrance and saturation, and that's as a kind of a different style of editing versus just converting to black and white, right? We can hit the V key, we can get the black and white mixing options to where we can start messing with tonality, but I'm going to show you some different ways to be a little more creative with your black and whites. Step 2, want to dial in density with the tone curve, right? So when it comes to those specular highlights, when it comes to the darker tones in this image, like in her hair, I want to make sure that we have a good range of tonality where we're not losing any detail, but we're also not flattening all that tonality. It's very important. Step number 3 is going to be dodge the client, burn down the background, right? So I have a brighter background. She's wearing a white dress. She has a darker complexion. I want to make sure that we're looking at her and not getting lost in anything else in this image, right? I want to make sure our attention is on her eyes and her face and their beauty, right? I don't want us to get lost in the blown out highlights on the dress, what's going on in the background, right? We want to focus on the clients. And that's where the editing is going to help us get there. Step 4, localize skin retouching, right? So there's no portrait work without any kind of retouching, right? It's kind of a standard. So I want to make sure to kind of show different ways that I'm going to soften the skin, but I'm still going to keep that texture there. We're going to work with the eyes a little bit, accentuate the lips, really bring out some detail and some tonality in the hair. And just kind of clean up a few things. And then step number 5 is always my favorite, final touches, where it's attention to detail, where we can hit every detail to make sure this image goes from here to there to really wow my client, or just get some good portfolio work, right? That's going to get impact on the website. So let's jump into step number 1 with editing with the vibrance and saturation tool. All right, so step number 1 is going to be dropping the vibrance and the saturation here to get my image essentially black and white. Now the difference that I like to do with this type of a look versus going with converting it to black and white is just that difference between this kind of tonality that I get here almost still has a little bit of a color involved in it. Um, we can really get some cool tones out of our image here by dropping the vibrance and then lowering the saturation to a point right to um, your own kind of taste here. I like to take it down to about -50. And a big reason why I like to do that is so I still have my color sliders here, the temperature and tint, I still have access to use those. So I can actually warm this image up if I want to have like a warmer black and white, which is pretty cool, right? We can still go in here and mess with tint. Now it doesn't really do too much for this image. I don't need to mess with that too much, but it keeps this out of the color grading panel, as well as just keeping things simple. So if I want to warm this image up, I can, right? So I can take it from here to there to just add some more warmth and some more creativity to this image. Now that I'm already just in the basic panel, right, keep things simple, I can start to, adjust my basic sliders. So I can hold shift, double click on whites, double click on blacks. So that way I have kind of a perfectly true, you know, perfect density here. I might want to lower the whites a little bit, lower the highlights to kind of fix the dress. But as you can see, it starts to mess with the face. So we want to probably fix some of that stuff a little bit later on with the adjustment tool. But just kind of showing you real quick on how we can do some adjustments here. As we lift the shadows, we want to make sure we're dropping the black point so that way we don't lose that tonality in those true skin tones, right? So just these little subtle adjustments here, I'm very happy even adding some texture just as a quick proof if I wanted to do something like this. Now, of course, I can turn my J key on to make sure I'm not clipping anything in the hair. That's very important. I want to bring some of that back. Turn that off. Kind of start there. So I already like the way that this image is turning out. So real quick, step number one, dropping the vibrance and messing with the saturation to where even if you want maybe the saturation to be lower, you can have some of the more of those warm tones really come out. Starts to look pretty cool. All right, step number two is going to be dial in the density with the tone curve. So we've already kind of done that with the whites and blacks slider. But what I want to do is I'm going to kind of take these back where they were, right, and kind of leave all of this as is. And I'm going to jump into the tone curve. So in order to get into our target adjustment tool, which is what I like to use, we can do Shift, Option, Command, T, and that immediately takes us in to the tone curve and it turns on the target adjustment tool. So what we can do is we can click on very specific parts of the image, drag up to increase, click on other parts of the image, drag down to decrease. And what this is doing is it's messing with specifically the tone curve and the very specific darks or shadows, lights or highlights. It's affecting specific regions of our image, and we don't have to really figure out what regions these are. We just have to click and drag, right? There's not really too much involved outside of that. So we can go in here, mess with the lights, kind of drop that down a little bit, and we can really start to mess with the tonality of this image. So we can take a look where we were, kind of where it took the image, right? It almost looks a little more flat, right? I'm not necessarily happy with the way that this image looks, but I can reset some of these regions as well and kind of come off some of the highlights. But with the tone curve, we can also start to dial in more specifically with a pointed curve. So if we wanted to do something a little more stylistic, like go with a matte style, bring back some of those tones there, flatten some of the whites, start to mess with some of the tonality there. We have to be very careful, of course, as we get creative. We want the client to be able to recognize themselves, and we don't get too heavy-handed with some of those matte tones because we're really going to kind of destroy the natural beauty of her hair and her complexion here, right? We don't want to go too extreme with some of those things, right? So making sure that we're not losing any detail in the hair is so important here. So with this, I'd probably reset this so that way I could go back and just kind of focus on those changes that we made from here to here. And I think they're subtle enough. We can dial them in a little bit better with the adjustment brushes, but you get the idea. All right, step number three is going to be dodge the subject and burn down the background. Pretty self-explanatory, right? So to use the adjustment brush, we can hit the K key to immediately open up our tool here. Now, typically it has the last settings that you used here, and you can create presets, right? So anytime you want to save some settings as a new preset, you can, which makes things so much faster when you want to dodge and burn, brighten the eyes, right? Skin softening, all that kind of good stuff. So coming in real quick here, I like to make a dodge brush for the face. So in order to do that, I like to bring the exposure up zero point 0.2, and then I'm also going to lift the shadows up to 20. And I keep all of these numbers pretty close to the same, so that way I can kind of keep them within range, right? So we're going to lift the shadows, lift the exposure. We're also going to, we can show our mask, drop the black point down to -20, just to kind of give a real good sense. But what we'll do is I'll show you kind of the difference between dropping the black point and not, just to kind of show you how flat it is. So what we want to do is we want to paint this on the skin, and we want to make sure it's only going on the skin. We don't want the lips, we don't want the eyes, all that kind of stuff, because we're going to edit that stuff on their own later. So as we go in here and we're just painting, right, you can see that effect painting on the skin. Now, if we want to make it easier on ourselves, we hit the O key and we can see exactly where it's going. Now, you notice that some of this isn't painting on exactly because the auto mask is turned on. So we could turn that off, make sure that that's gone. And what we want to make sure is we are only painting on the face, right? So come in here, hold the Option key to remove that, of course. Now, if we want to come off on the feathering, not have it so extreme, we can. But you get the idea. We're going to focus more on the face here. For skin smoothing, we'll get the whole face. But now we're going to go in and we are going to hold the Option key, shrink our brush down, and we're going to take the eyes out here. Basically, like creating almost like a facial mask here, right? Something you'd be doing for like pores for the most part. But here we're going to come in and kind of just quickly make sure auto mask is turned off, which it looks like it is now. And I'm going really quickly here. We don't have to be super accurate, but just kind of good enough here. So we'll turn that off, right? So we get back to our skin here. So we can see right away, kind of before and after, it's just bringing out some of those highlights on the face, and it's bringing some of the shadows, and it just kind of helps bring things out. I really like the way this looks so far. So we're just doing the dodging on the face here, and now we'd want to go in and specifically go and edit the eyes. So with our new pin selected, we can come in here and work on just the eyes. Now, the eyes I'm going to have different adjustments for as well. So I'm going to have 0.25 there, and then I like to, not necessarily going to bring shadows out, but I want to have the whites up to 25, which kind of helps, right, just brighten the eyes a little bit. I like that better than shadows because I don't want her pupils to get, I don't want the pupils getting flat, right? I just want to bring the whites out. That's going to help in the eyes. And then we can also lower the blacks just a little bit, so that way that kind of helps bring back some definition in the pupils. And then we can add some clarity. Now, clarity is a tool that I like to use whenever I do want to affect tonality. The big difference between clarity and texture is texture sharpens without messing with that. Let's see here, let's zoom in. Kind of see so far where we're getting, right? So I like that it brings out these highlights on the face here. It's really doing a good job there with the shadows. We could lower those highlights if we wanted to, but I kind of like the way they look. So far, right? Eyes and face. And then what we'd want to do is we'd want to come in and fix the dress. And this is something that we would want to come in and make sure the brightest part of the image and what we're looking at, we're not getting stuck on the dress, right? We want to get to her face. So creating a new brush, pretty simply, just create a highlights. Take down to like -25. And we're just going to come along here and paint. Right? So maybe take it down to -20. Just a subtlety. Now we probably don't need to have it stick out that far, but that kind of gets it where we need it, right? On and off. So it almost looks like we have a light on her, right? Looks starting to look a little more dramatic. And I think that's really important to kind of have those things stick out. And it's so simple to do, right? If you had your presets and you painted it on, we could see exactly right where this is going on the skin. And this is going to help us already paint a new mask for our skin softening because we don't want skin softening on the eyes or the lips. We kind of already painted our way there. So let's jump into step 4. All right, so step number 4 is going to be localized skin retouching. And what I mean by that, localize, is we're going to use brushes, right? We want to make sure that we're only brushing on or retouching the areas that we want. We can already see these warmer tones coming out in our image to really kind of push this. And I feel like this is a creative black and white, right? To kind of show off here, what we're doing. So first things first, what we're going to do is we are going to go and we are going to duplicate this mask. And so by doing that, it already gives us what we need here. Of course, we're going to change these adjustments there. And we are going to drop the texture down. Now, I like to drop texture down as opposed to clarity because it doesn't affect the tonality of our image. So let me show you real quick, right, with just this applied. I'm gonna, those are on auto, that's fine. So make sure we're not looking at pins the entire time. So here's what it looks like with texture, okay? That's back. Here's what it looks like with clarity. It almost flattens the skin. I don't like, I really just don't like the way clarity looks. I mean, I feel like negative texture, in my opinion, just looks better, right? So as we have this option here, maybe it'd be easier if we created another virtual copy. So if we go back, -50, right? Clarity, see that? Just like, I don't know, maybe that helps even out the skin, but that's kind of not really the point of the dodging and burning that I did, right? I just feel like it makes it look dingy. I just don't like it. So, so -50 clarity. It's the way I like to do skin softening. Now, we need to turn. Either we can turn our mask back on, or we can kind of do this, you know, with our eye here. But it's important we hit the O key. We can kind of see where it's going, and we want to make sure we're applying this to our total image. So I like to turn it on to make sure I'm not missing any parts of the image. Right, it just makes it super helpful. And we also want to make sure as we're going down, we use it on the arms as well. But I think we went a little bit crazy on the lips here, so I'm going to make sure we're good. And you can see the effect, so it's not like you're flying blind or anything with it. So we can make sure 100% it's not on the eyes. If I come back into the eyes and I want to take this a step further, you can definitely add some texture to the eyes, kind of make those pop a little bit. Not a bad idea. But jumping back into our skin softening. Now, if we want to affect that pin behind, right, you're thinking, well, where'd that go? Right, I can just move the pin, go to the other one, and I get right back to my pin there. So Very helpful. I'm going to move this back on top, right? Kind of a little trick there, but it's super helpful. So something I'd want to come out here do as well. So I can come out and I can soften the arm. The arms are already pretty soft, so I don't know if this is even something we need to do. Yeah, probably not. Let's just go ahead and take this off. I'm actually fine with the way that that looks. So, skin softening looks good. So let's jump into the lips. So if I want to come in here, new brush, I can hold Option and click Reset. That just quickly resets everything that I need. But what we are going to do for the lips is we want to bring a little exposure up. So we'll put that at 0.2. And we are going to put the highlights at +20. Um, kind of odd to put highlights at +20 for sure, but I want those to kind of pop a little bit. So you'll see that kind of showing up here. So highlights at 10 because we're also going to add in some whites. That looks good. And then we'll put the blacks at -5. And what we'll do is we'll add a little bit of clarity so that way it does add some tonality to it. I'm okay with that there. So we'll paint. We'll just watch that kind of take off on the lips here a little bit. Just kind of get our face centered here. Kind of help us out, get the pens to go away. Let's do this. Without it, with it. Without it, with it. I think with it looks good. Now we want to make sure, in the case that we want to make sure her lipstick was darker than her complexion here. We want to make sure that they're not, just kind of losing and blending in either. So drop the black point in. I don't know if we need to necessarily take exposure up. Might make sense to just drop the blacks down. So from there to there, I really like the way that that looks. Um, we'll just add a little bit of exposure and we're good to go. All right, so now we can jump into the hair. Now, with the hair, I like to use the auto mask tool when we're masking so that way it automatically masks out these edges. And usually it does a pretty good job, but we'll see kind of how well Lightroom does. So what we're doing is we're going to turn on our mask and then we are going to click on auto mask. So you can see how well this does. So as we're painting all around the edges here, we're kind of going to see how well it's going to do auto mask, right? So as I paint to the edge, how well is it going to not blend in the background? It's doing okay. Obviously, we're not seeing it perfect, but kind of taking it there. Now it's probably going to, there we go, creates a pretty good line around the hand there. Not perfect, but a pretty decent job of just kind of not applying. Now, this is where it's probably going to get a little bit rough, right? Where it's going to try and pick off the face. See how well it does there. Not great, but it's there. So I don't know if any of you have used the auto mask tool or it's kind of not sure what it's used for and how great it is. I mean, it's not perfect, but it does a pretty quick masking here, and we can come in and refine this, so that won't be a concern, right? We're getting a little overshooting there, so we can come in, clean that up pretty easily. That's not a problem. Same goes here if we want to kind of back off that area a little bit there. And if we want these spots that didn't fill in, right, to come back, then we just turn off auto mask. That kind of fixes that. As we zoom out, didn't do a bad job. Here's kind of where we are. So let's turn that off. Now, what we can do for our hair is reset all of these. And for the hair, I definitely want to take exposure up 0.1. We'll take the highlights and whites to 10. Let's see. Shadows +5. Blacks -5. And we will take the texture up on this one. We'll take the texture like 30. So let's get an idea for what this looks like. We'll zoom in. It's always helpful to remove, bring it back. Look at that. From there to there. I think that looks really good. The only thing I'd probably want to do is maybe take shadows out. Now there's some clipping going on, so maybe we just probably need to be careful with that. But I mean, there's going to be some clipping for sure. I just want to make sure. Going from there. And that definition, I'm very happy with the way that looks. Just take the exposure down to there. So far so good. So let's jump into the final touches to really get this image to the next stage. All right, so here we are in the final touches for step number 5. So I want to use the Q key to jump into the spot removal. So these little areas that I feel are just annoying, I want them to go away. So I can do spot removal there, spot removal here. And of course I want to zoom in to make sure I'm not making any bad mistakes. We can toggle this on and off just to get rid of these little spots, right? So that looks fine. It's little things, right? So just a couple spots there. This little spot down here is kind of bothering me. I think that looks fine. Now we can also come in here and focus on a little bit further with the skin. So with retouching, of course you want to remove the blemishes as well. So I didn't want you to think that we forgot about that part. So we can turn on the visual spots to kind of see where we want to remove our images. So put the feather there. Right, if I want to kind of come in here and find zits, can. It's kind of an odd way to do it for sure, but it kind of helps us see those spots. Usually works more for dust and things like that, but we can come in here and quickly come in. And I have the heel brush. I like to use that over the clone. And some other things too, right? With the eyes, if we want to fix this. Now sometimes Photoshop's going to be a little more helpful. And it's odd that it's sampling the skin for that, but let's see what it looks like. Let's put this on auto. Um, it's actually not bad. Um, just remove that little spot there. And we can get super picky here, right? We can go in here and really start to mess with different areas to kind of come in here and fix some of the spots. But there's really not a whole lot of touch-up spots that I need to fix here. Um, right, like I don't need to come in here and do too much. So I think that kind of covers what we need to with that. Let's zoom in here a little bit further. All right, so I've already cropped this image, so you can kind of see the original here that I had, just so we kind of brought it down so it's a little more focus on her. It's a huge part of the composition to make sure, regardless of how creative I was in camera and what kind of vision I had. I mean, overall, this is something I'd want to deliver to the client, maybe even a little bit tighter, right? But kind of put the eyes in the third. I'm happy with that, where this portrait is as well. So we can also kind of push the warmth a little bit more. We can take the, if you want to take the saturation back or, bring it back up, we can kind of do anything we want there to bring in a little more, kind of warmth. I think that starts to look pretty cool. Um, then we really want to look at like sharpening overall. That would be where I'd kind of jump in here. And I'm zooming in. Want to make sure I'm at 100%. Yep, which I am. Here we go. So with sharpening, we can bring in some different options here. So if we hold Option, right, it's going to make our image completely grayscale. So if I hold Option and do Radius, we can almost faintly see the edges of our subject. We can start to increase the radius to where we can start to see the eyes come in. Now I'm going to bring this up to, I think, 85, and that'll help us with these things. So we'll do the radius, we'll keep that close to 1. Detail, take it all the way to the left, bring it to the right. Detail's good. As we can see, toggling this on, off and on, brings a lot of sharpness in, right? This is going to help kind of unify the whole image. Makes it look complete after we've done all of our retouching. It always helps to do sharpening afterwards. So masking is a very important one as we're holding Option. And the white areas are where the sharpening is going to apply, and the black areas are going to be where it's masked out. So as you can see, the further we go to the right, it's going to get away from the skin tones and really kind of focus on the edges. So I kind of toggle that on and off. As you see the eyes and the lips and the bracelet and the hair, those really get accentuated a lot more than the skin. I don't want the skin to get sharp, right? Just want to focus on those areas. And this is at 200%, so we could zoom out a little bit. Pixels start to break up. But that's it. I think that that's where I'd want to land this portrait. The highlights on the face, look great. I mean, looking at this before and after, very happy with this work. And of course, with presets and things like that, we'd be working much faster, through this. So it's kind of more of talking it through and different adjustments and things like this. But I can't imagine you couldn't do a portrait like this in 5 or 7 minutes. I mean, it's pretty quick. All right, so here are the results. So for me, it's all about using the right tool for the job. So here, this is all done in Lightroom Classic, which is awesome, right? We don't have to leave, export our image, create copies, all that crap. We have exactly what we need in one place. Now, what I did is I put together the image on the left here, which is using the convert to monochromatic treatment. So a true black and white on the left, and our final edit on the right. So I took all the same adjustments outside of the vibrance and saturation process that I made, and I applied everything to this left image. So you can see these both portraits, and you might like the left one over the right. That's okay, right? That's the beauty of editing creatively, right? There's you can have a difference of opinion or taste and things like that. So I wanted to try something different and really kind of push an edit that really accentuated a darker skin tone, but also still kept some of that warmth and some of that, I guess, color in there, so to speak. So I'm really happy with the way the edit came out overall. Kind of taking things like presets to save some time and spend more time on masking, of course. I mean, like I said, I think an edit like this, if you're running through it without kind of talking through every aspect, I mean, you should be able to get through an edit like this in 5 minutes or less. So I hope this gives you some takeaways or at least a cool new way to make black and white images. Above all, like, right, we're here to learn. I'm hoping that you got something out of this, right? So end of the day, it's all in the details. So when we were working on um, dodging and burning and things like that, right, going from here to here, so that way we are focusing on the client's eyes and we're not going anywhere else, right? That's the most important thing. We want to make sure all of our attention is right here. And so it's subtly burning down the highlights here, right? It's subtly darkening the background, right? But it's making sure we're focused right in here. And that was the goal, right, with the editing. When it comes to retouching on the skin, we want to make sure, we're not doing too many things to where a client doesn't recognize themselves, right? You don't want to make them feel self-conscious because you completely changed their face. I did no liquefy, no work like that. I mean, I I'm happy with the way she looks here, and I want to show that off, right? So that's something I typically never bring to the table for a proof. I never liquefy somebody. I never want someone to be thinner, or like body shape them, to almost body shame them. I mean, where it makes sense, or if they've brought something up like, hey, I think my face is wide, or could you do something with that? Of course, I'm gonna hook them up with something like that. But I wouldn't do that without any kind of direction from the client. Um, but overall, I mean, this is something for you to try out. I definitely recommend you do it on your next shoot. Think about the background, think about the clothing, what you want to do with an image. I really implore you to think about black and white and how you have that contrast of the background and your subject and how your subject can pop. But when you lose all that color, right, it's really focused on the content, and you want to make sure tonality and where your eyes are going to go are to your subject. So remember, when it comes to editing, go easy so your client can recognize themselves, right? It's not just so easy as converting it to black and white and doing a whole bunch of heavy-handed editing. I mean, you want to have some sort of a plan in place, right? So thanks for tuning in, guys.